Hello, this is Chris Cameron, instructional designer in the College of ISD. Happy to welcome you to the Stimulating Innovation and Honoring discussion today. And it is my pleasure to introduce Larry Ragan and Brad Zdenek. So guys, take it away.
Hi, thanks. Terrific. Thanks, Chris. And thanks for the group being here in the room with us today, and also our collection of colleagues from around the country who are joining us on the Connect Pro site. Thank you. We're really looking forward to sharing some ideas. You know, Chris, when you started to introduce this, I thought you were using stimulating as a way to, we're going to have a really stimulating conversation, and I thought, oh no, that's part of the title. So we need to make sure we capture that. So we want to start off by just setting the stage a little bit about this topic, and also give you a little bit of the history of COIL and how we've sort of arrived where we are today. Some of you will know that Penn State's World Campus started in 1998 and has grown over the years. But one of the decisions made very early on was that the World Campus Initiative was not going to be a research project. That is, it would be strictly an academic exercise. It would be a real business venture, for lack of better terminology. And so I've always said that we left a lot of research water go under the bridge over the years. We didn't sort of embrace that opportunity. Throughout that time, however, conversations were always held about that research aspect and how do we sort of build and capitalize on the World Campus as a project and as a way to sort of embrace the whole of the community. That's where the genesis of COIL really came from. As Penn State grew in its knowledge about online and reached into other academics units within the university, the question was, well, how do we sort of maximize that for the benefit of, ultimately, for our students? Because that's really what the key is, both of the World Campus reaching new students and, of course, COIL. So we started in 2012. Officially is our birth date, September 10th. Yep, I remember that September 10th, 2012 we started. And it really had several aspects that were loosely defined at the time. One was we knew we wanted a community. We really wanted to structure an environment where all Penn Staters, at the time we were thinking primarily Penn State, would have an opportunity to engage in exploration of new ideas, invention, discovery of new things, as well as the application of those inventions to the educational process, innovation, if you will. And we were very intentional about reaching faculty members, of course, but also staff. We have a lot of staff throughout the university who, for a really long time, have been very active and engaged in things around new developments and explorations, and we didn't always have a chance to engage them. And of course, students. And we're going to talk a little bit later on about some of our challenges. That student population is a difficult one to tap into in a consistent way. Second thing we wanted was to have a really engaged community, people actively participating in our programming, feeling as though they have ownership of COIL and are contributing. We wanted to be able to do this in this context of research and development. Coil Peck was the one who added the, Kyle. He added that language about development as well. We initially started out as a research group. He was really the one who said, let's keep this with a development flavor. That is, we're going to stimulate the construction of new things, whether they be technology or pedagogy. We're going to capture that. Finally, we wanted to be able to make an impact. And that impact is we really are interested in how we can help to improve learning in all of its delivery formats through online innovations. That's kind of how we've arrived at the point. And September 10th, this year, will be 3 years old officially. Brad, I'll turn it over to you.
So, welcome everyone. I am Brad Zdenek. I'm the educational strategist with COIL. And one of the things I've had the honor of doing is helping to set up many of the programs and run many of the programs that COIL has been using to try to do what Larry just talked about, some of our objectives and what we had set. What you're sitting in today is one of those things we do, which are called COIL Conversations. And let me set the stage a little bit as well. Often presentations turn into 40 minutes of being talked to, and then maybe you've got 10, 15 minutes to get your questions in there. And maybe if you get a couple questions, then that's great. We want and always wanted these to be conversations, not presentation and response. So what we're asking all of you to do today is answering some questions with us. And what we're going to do is kind of walk through the path or walk down the path that COIL went down, thinking about what we could stimulate innovation in online learning, stimulate innovation here at Penn State and beyond, and our thought processes that we went through as we navigated that path. And so we're going to kind of be asking some questions, and then we'll work through it as we did when we first thought about these questions, kind of through the COIL lens. And one of the ways that we did it, probably one of the primary ways we did it, was through kind of this modified SWOT type thing, strategies, the various opportunities that you have, the challenges that you're going to face. And that's what we're going to focus on today, are the opportunities and challenges. And so one of the questions that I'll throw out for you now to be thinking about, and we'll get to your responses in a second. And for those of you joining us virtually, please type this into the chat box, and we'll relay them in the room and discuss the questions and respond to them. But what are the opportunities right now? One of the reasons COIL exists right now is because a group of people saw new opportunities that could be taken advantage of, new opportunities that needed to be acted upon if Penn State was going to move forward, if Penn State was going to be an innovative place, if Penn State was going to build a culture of innovation, COIL being a small part of this. So one of the questions to throw out to you is, what are those opportunities? Well, when COIL first started, one of the first activities that we had, and I don't have the date of this off the top of my head, but it might have been September, when we had our brainstorming meeting.
That was September 10th.
Was it September
That's the
10th?
birthday.
That is,
yep.
Okay. So September 10th, we had a meeting in which we brought together faculty, staff, and students into a room together to through what COIL be. So this is going to be a Center for Online Innovation and Learning. We had a name, but we didn't necessarily have the actual things we were going to be doing yet. We had a mission that we could mold and we could sculpt a little bit. So we thought, all right, there's a small set of us sitting in a room together. We can come up with these opportunities and the ways we can, and the challenges and the ways we can address these things. What would be much more productive is to actually ask everyone, as many people as we can get into a room together, to think through these issues. And that's what we did. We asked them, what are the opportunities right now? And what opportunities exist within the field? And COIL's perspective and what kind of came out of that meeting were a few things. One, that we live in a particularly unique time right now as far as technological innovation and the speed and the rate, the dynamic nature of the development of these technologies, as well as the proliferation and accessibility to these technologies. And we are at a critical point where we have the opportunity to either seize these opportunities and move forward with them or miss the boat. That leads into another aspect that we identified, which is that this is a shifting market. In higher education, this is a shifting market. And right now, this is a particular time where we have the opportunity to either lose a leadership role and lose status, lose the place that we have built, or to leverage that and move forward and further embed ourselves as the place for online learning, as a place people look to for online learning and innovations. So these are some of the opportunities we saw, as well as entrepreneurship culture. Here within our local environment, and for those of you coming in remotely will not be familiar with this, but we have areas or groups here within our local town and surrounding cities that are growing and focused specifically on entrepreneurship, taking the great ideas that we know are sitting in every office, are sitting in each one of the students' chairs, are sitting in the businesses around town, these great ideas, and trying to find a way to and bring them to market and to scale them and the like. Often what happens is great ideas are popping up around the university and they stay in those chairs. Someone says, I wish we did this way because this would be a better way of doing it. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. Because I don't know how. I don't have support. I don't have money. It's not part of my job. It doesn't mean you don't have an idea. So what COIL thought was let's find ways of getting opportunities to these ideas. And not just in the traditional route. So you will have a traditional grant funding for a tenured faculty member that can run it, because there are great ideas there. But there are also great ideas amongst the staff. There are also great ideas amongst students, undergrad and grad. And we needed to provide opportunities and the bandwidth for those ideas to grow. And that's why we have the little seed image here, because that's what we saw ourselves as, providing the opportunity, fertilizing the soil in order for these seeds to start to grow. Now, given challenges that we'll talk about later, you have to have limits as to how far you can help that seed grow. But we saw ourselves as focusing on that seed, on that beginning point. There are also increasing support structure for exploring, developing, and implementing innovations. And this is true across the market. Many institutes of higher education, as well as places that are not institutes of higher education, are focusing on building centers and support networks for innovation. We need to do that as well. And we have pockets throughout the university. COIL had a very specific mandate to address some needs that were not necessarily being addressed already. So this is where we came in the field. This is where we came when we were birthed, as far as what we were going to do and the opportunities we saw sitting there. So now that you've had time, maybe some people typing into the chat box and sitting here in the room, what are the opportunities you see? Did I miss any? What do you see right now? What can we be doing?
So Josh has been putting in a few ideas. Thanks, Josh, for that input. One comment he makes is about providing graduate student assistantships for students who are at a distance. You know, right now, and providing them a set of opportunities, or obviously in the virtual world, that we provide our students and residents. And I've always liked that idea. They deserve that, and more than that, the interactions I've had with our students at a distance, they really desire that. They're really looking for a way to interact. What they'll say is, I want to work with a faculty, or I want to be involved in primary research on a topic, but I'm not here. You know, I'm physically separated from the university, and I feel like I'm sort of kept out of that. In particular, in the World Campus, which is serving primarily an adult learner population, it's a big driver for them, and I think that's a place where we can be creative. You know, one of the you didn't use that I often think about for COIL is as an instigator. You know, that it's a good thing to have a unit someplace that's just kind of stirring things up and getting dialogue. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't go well, but
the dialogue is
what's dialogue is really important. It's to raise these questions to within our context, within our community, and have. I like that one. Other ideas. Sam, if I could direct to you just for a moment, you're also teaching an online course? That's where I was trying to get to.
I do. I teach my course online.
So do you see ways that, so you've got students now distributed wherever.
All over the world.
Do you have ideas about things that we can be doing to help connect?
I do. There are so many opportunities to connect, to leverage the technologies available, and certainly for me, I'm aware of probably more of these technologies or platforms than most people. But it's a time factor. So it's finding maybe I was thinking about this past summer. The many opportunities that exist with my course, and I'm thinking there's got to be some students or instructors or someone who would like to try this out, and they could do it in class and work alongside me. I don't have time to move things forward, but somebody else could, and so I was thinking about COIL, and I was thinking about some of the many possibilities here. So using courses like mine is kind of testing.
Okay. So you would be, in that kind of environment, you might have like research associates, turn students into research associates, where you could be directing because you don't have the time to do all of these things.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And we do some innovative work. I mean, people are having, we use a form called Flipgrid for people to have video
Oh, yeah.
conversations. And you know, and so there are things that go back and forth, but there's so many opportunities. It's a time, it really is a time factor.
Okay.
And I think that's why a lot of people sort of fall back into old patterns because of
Sure. Sure.
And I'm also interested. So our moderator for today, our host, Chris Gamrett, is part of the COIL family. Was one of the principal investors on the first round of research initiation, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But Chris has been deeply involved in the movement of or the implementation of digital badges, which aligned with, we were talking about this just before the session started, aligned with competency-based learning, competency-based education. And some may, depending on how involved you are in the field, some may not see this as an innovation anymore because it's kind of been around for a little bit. But I would say if you were to poll faculty, staff, and students around Penn State, you probably have a majority of them that either have not heard of it or have some significant misunderstandings as to what it is. So Chris, I was curious what your perspective is on some of the opportunities related to digital badging, maybe, you know, uncoupling some of the, yeah, I turned
Yeah.
that on.
So I would say that definitely looking at both where Penn State is with digital badges and comparing that to where other universities are, we're still fairly far along in relationship to other schools. But we're not the only ones that are thinking about it and working on it. And there are some schools that are doing really amazing stuff with it. A presentation from folks at Colorado State, and they're doing some really cool programs out there. So you know, it really helps to see what other groups are doing and really being able to compare notes. And that's been something that I think has really, that COIL has provided a lot of value to, is being able to stimulate those conversations and being able to say, oh, you're doing this, you're doing that, and to bring the right people together to have those discussions and being able to come up with new ideas and try to solve these things in creative ways. Um, in terms of where it might go at Penn State, from what I've seen, the low-hanging fruit is badges not in classes. It becomes a lot harder once you start to integrate into courses, especially if it has to go to the faculty senate or something along those lines. And that's what I'm just seeing the most in terms of publications out there. That's informal education or outreach type things. That's where badges are going, at least for right now. But there are opportunities to really think about not just badges as this like one thing, but badges for different purposes and badges that can be used in different ways. And so I think that that's another opportunity to really start to exploring um, how different groups at Penn State and other places might be using them.
Great, thank you. And I think this ties into one of the other things that we saw as an opportunity, which is that we are gaining a better understanding every day of how people learn, as well as what motivates people and what we can do better within our traditional format to leverage that understanding. Edge is a good example of this. You know, arguably came out of video gaming and a gaming industry where it's being used and that industry suddenly saw how motivating this was for people to complete tasks, to do certain missions in games, and how this digital representation of that success motivated people. One of the things we struggle with within education, now you can go down the retention route, you can go through the completion route, you can go through the success in the course route, but a motivation and using the potential, the opportunity for badging to be used as a motivational tool as well as a component of competency-based learning, uncoupling programs and allowing people to choose approach to their education. There are many opportunities out there that came out of something that was, you know, seemingly not education related and 15 years ago.
So, Brad, we have Jerry Reese has been writing a little bit about, you know, a good way to frame this question about opportunities are what are your unmet needs? So, as an educator, as a student, faculty, staff, but hasn't what would be a challenge? I asked him then, can you think of something from his perspective? And he's describing an area that we're really interested in, which is the individualized adaptive learning environment, and stating that that's something in his space where he is looking for additional support, learning, instruction. And I can tell you, we've got our eye on that one. That's an area of great interest for us because we see a lot of, in particular, the online space and the affordances of that online space, allowing the instruction and the interactions to be individualized, personalized to the learner. So thanks for that, Jerry. That's good input.
I think what this runs into is we knew the opportunities were there, and we got the feedback from faculty staff what the opportunities were there. And when we looked at what could we do to stimulating innovation within online learning, but here at Penn State and then eventually beyond, because we have a sense of the opportunities, and we've assessed that through this wide spectrum, and not just here at University Park, but representation from our Commonwealth campuses. But then we had to sit down and have the hard conversation of how. So we knew what the opportunities were, we knew what some of the opportunities were, but then we had to sit down and think to ourselves, how are we going to do this? And what are the challenges we're going to face in doing this? And that brought us to what Larry will be talking about now.
Right, which just a second ago, I wrote a note to Brad and said, I forget what I'm supposed to say on this screen, but it's a really neat screen. So this actually, he reminded me then very nicely, as he often does, reminds me what I said yesterday. This is a little bit like what we were struggling with in the early on. What were the challenges that COIL could bring resources, or any organization would bring resources to begin to address. And so we are a fairly small unit. We're 4 full-time staff members. We have a directors group of an additional 4 people, and then we have this larger community. And our challenge was, how do we build programming that gets to those 3 domains I talked about earlier on, about the community, getting people engaged, embedding research and development as a strategy. And so we're struggling a little bit with, I won't say struggling, I think we've made some great advances, but we're currently challenging ourselves to say, how could we be doing things better? What are the kinds of programs we can be designing to address some of the issues that you're coming up with? And I think Brad's going to lead us through a question maybe a little bit about some of the challenges that we all face.
Sure, I can. So when we, I would say the number one thing we began struggling with, and we to this day, is this first question of what is innovation. And when I started to ask Chris about digital badging, some who would sit down in front of us and say that's not an innovation. That's working on it already. There's research. That's not an innovation. Leading edge. That's innovation. The stuff hasn't been tried yet. And that wasn't what COIL came to. Oh, sorry. That wasn't what COIL came to as innovation. But we struggled back and forth of what is innovation when we had our research initiation grants, which we'll talk about in a second. And we sat down with teams of reviewers, and one of the questions that they had in the criteria for their review was, is this innovative? And in a room of 40 people, we would have 30 different answers as to what an innovation is. And you look at the standard deviation of people's responses, it's all over the board. It's really wide. And what we have tried to do is we have tried over time to define innovation as best as we can. And right there, you can see the problem. Because when you're trying to define innovation, you don't know maybe innovative down the road. And defining innovation could eliminate those things that you haven't anticipated yet. This is the you don't know what you don't know yet problem. But, and Larry will probably talk on this a little bit more in a second, but we came to this struggle of an innovation and invention. And this is something Larry has brought to the table a number of times during these discussions. And the come down and sat down and tried to struggle. And Larry, do you want to talk about your thoughts on that?
I'll just give you. I have this this 5I model thing that always goes in my head. I'm not sure if I'm going to remember all of them, but I can tell you it sort of starts with an inspiration. Back to Jerry's point, it's usually an inspiration around a need. Then it goes to invention. So we have an inspiration. We move to something now that we build a solution, a pedagogy that tries to address that. And that's called an invention. That's a small but localized solution. When we then scale that, that's innovation. That's taking that invention. And this is not my original idea. I heard this at a conference last year, and I just really stuck with me the way Peter Senge, I think, was the author, at least that thought. I really like that. We start to look at impact. I told you there were 5, so I'm going to change it to 4 because I can't remember the 5th. But then there's the impact. It's okay. So we go from inspiration to impact. What is, how do we measure that? And that's really tough. It's something that we've struggled with. Like after 3 years, we sit around occasionally and say, well, how do we know we're making any difference in anybody's lives? How do we know that any student at the end of an educational experience is having a better learning experience than what they did prior? It's really, really tough to get. And how do we know that we had any impact? Impact, that's what it was. The 5th. No, I said that was the 4th. It'll come to me. I should have written it down. But anyways, so that thought is how do you stimulate innovation? How do you and do you really start with stimulating invention? And I think that's what we do, for example, through the RIG grant process, is trying to stimulate that single localized invention that we can then take to proof of concept, perhaps get larger funding for it, which is really cool, go to NSF or NIH or whomever, or begin implementing it and testing the efficacy of that idea to see if it has actually potential for impact.
And that feeds directly into the second bullet, which is focus. In defining innovation, it helped us to figure out what our focus was going to be. We are of limited resources, as every unit is. As Larry mentioned, we're a very small team. We are 4 full-time staff, and graduate assistant, and intern, who put in various hours in a week. So we had to be focused because we can't address every need. We can't move from invention and support invention across the university on any need that is identified, and then also help with the scaling of that. We just couldn't do it. So what we had to decide was, do we focus, or is it better to seed the field? Seed the field a little bit more scarcely. Take those resources, spread them out, and see what comes up. Laser focus on one specific problem, need, whatever it may be. And again, this is something where it's a dynamic relationship between us and this problem. And depending on the year, this changes a little bit. Sometimes we'll focus a little bit more, and then sometimes we'll pull back and say, you know what, but there's great potential over here, so let's spread some of it. And I think that any organization that is going to focus on stimulating innovation in online learning or anywhere will struggle with this exact same question. And I don't necessarily know, and I don't know if we have differing opinions on this or not, but I don't necessarily know if it's a question that needs to be answered, or whether it is a dynamic relation between this question and the organization, and that it changes as time goes along. That's somewhat what we have come to. And then finally, the organizational structure, which kind of follows this, is okay. If you are going to focus on one thing, how do you assign tasks across this organization? And if you're going to focus on one thing and think about scaling that innovation, scaling an idea, how do you work within the structure of your larger unit or organization or university in order to scale things? Because it's fine for us to have a seed project, but if we can't find the soil to plant that seed in, if we don't know how to help it grow, the impact is going to be minimal. So this is one of the things that we also have worked well within, of identifying the organizational structure here at Penn State and the opportunities for advancing these ideas from when they first start as just a seed in someone's mind to us bringing some money to the table in order to develop that idea to let's see if we can make this a Penn State tool or a Penn State approach or even perhaps within a college or a course. So these are various things that we've struggled with challenges.
So Brad, we're getting some interesting chat going here. If I could just, and if we can reach out to the room as well. Yeah, the online group is way more chatty than the internal group. Hey, make note of that.
It's a little warm in the room.
It's very
so,
it is warm in the room.
Yeah.
So Lorna Kearns from Pitt mentioned that she's interested in this crossover between what we do in a face-to-face environment and what we're and saying that area, and I agree with her, is really ripe for exploration and maybe invention, leading to innovations. I think that's really an interesting one, and was sort of responding back to her. Another comment that Jerry brought in again, which I think is really telling. He says, I'm not as interested in the word innovation as I'm more interested in finding ideas that are useful. And that's really good, because we sometimes think it has to be net new and novel. Maybe it's also the application of an existing technology or an idea to a net or new novel effect. And I think we have to be open to that idea as well. It doesn't always have to be bright and shiny. Maybe just we're creating. We had an interesting,
I was just gonna bring that up.
Yeah, we had an interesting a little celebration on Monday, I guess it was, for a student who's been with us. He's finished his work with us this summer, so we had a little sit down pizza lunch with him. And we were talking about games, and this guy's a big gamer. I mean, a big gamer. Like I'm worried about him being in the real world rather than game world. But anyways, we were talking through things, and it's so interesting to hear his perspective of what gaming means to him and how he interacts with this space. And I mean, whether you like games or not, I'm not a gamer. I'll be upfront with that. But I immediately got me thinking about how do we embrace that pedagogy, that methodology, in ways to make our learning more engaging, or more active, or more powerful. So games have been around for a really long time, but maybe it's the application of those theories and practices that will be the innovation. So comments in the room, other thoughts about this? Dr. Butler, I'm forgetting your first name. Peter, yeah, nice to see you.
That's been frustrating. I mean, one reason I'm here is I don't know if you know, or you're Associate Dean for Education in College of Engineering.
Oh, I did.
Congratulations. Yeah, one of the things that I'm setting as a goal is to come up with kind of a position paper for engineering, which hasn't really made many inroads in online education. Fits and starts. But being faculty and being researchers, we always want new stuff, and I'm more curious about what has been tested. I mean, how do we assess what works? And that's one of the things. The only other thing I bring up that's not really necessarily related to that is, as I get into discussions with faculty and department heads and about what they're doing online, almost all of the conversation is that won't work, and they have some anecdote for why that won't work. That won't work because of that. And so I'd be curious to know how you
overcome that.
I'm trying to be understanding and say, yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying, and so on and so forth. And I'm not at this point going to make an argument of what does work, but hopefully by May or something like that, I'll have some idea. But I don't know if you want to address that issue of the skepticism. There's probably not as much skepticism in this room, but when you actually try to get faculty to do it, and the faculty are overloaded, do they really want to put in the effort to converting courses online? So,
yeah, it may not be as much of the topic of today's talk, and maybe we can chat later on. One of the thoughts I always have about that use of anecdotes, experiences to nullify, is I always think, what was the end? People actually, it was one person, but from all these enormous generalities. So I feel your pain. We've been through that.
I will say a little bit of either you ignore that, that it's not going to find the early adopters, and they're the individuals that can run with it. But that's somewhat what we're trying to do, particularly with, I keep coming back to them, and I swear we actually will talk about them in a second, with our research initiation grants, where we're finding those early adopters, trying to fund the generation of evidence that this particular approach, this innovation, this new thing works. That we at least have some evidence we can bring to the table for those skeptics, where they say, well, I heard this one story with this stuff, but we can say, here's some preliminary research that we did with your colleague that's teaching a course in the same college, same department, and here's some evidence. It's preliminary, but let's start. It's a place, it's a foothold. And that's part of what we're attempting to do with those grants, is to provide those footholds for innovation to take root.
Chris, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm really glad that earlier you mentioned Kyle's point on development. And I remember very clearly when he was talking about in the first run through, what are COIL proposals and what's involved in that. That he said that sometimes you have to build something to be able to study and understand it. And that was very true with the batching platform. We had done a little bit with that through NASA, but that grant had ended, and we really didn't know that very much about it. Since then, I've been able to do research from some of the data I've collected, but even still, we're just now getting pilots from that initial COIL grant running and moving forward. So a lot of stuff in like the next year that we're going to say, oh gosh, imagine what we can do in 2 years from now. It's just now being uncovered, even though it's like soon to be 3 years. So it's sort of a challenge to be able to say, all right, well, we're going to invest in that now, and then we'll see how much will come out of it. We didn't really know.
Yeah, there's a related thought, if I can, just real quick, that goes along with that. And I hear this, I just heard the provost say this a little while ago. He said, and be ready to fail, fail, fail. You've got to fail 4 times before you succeed. Until you fail, then they say, oh, well, how come that failed? So I think we have to have space in our environment to have, I've heard it referred to as fast failures. You have to be able to see it and be willing to say, okay, interesting idea, didn't quite work out the way we wanted to. But we still learn every time we do that.
This connection you had between innovation and simplicity, I think I could add a few things about that related to our COIL grant that we're sort of we'll be finishing in December. What we did with our grant is actually return to some very simple things that we've done years ago when we started out, and then we wanted to build this online course and to explain facilitation and all the work that we're doing in that realm. And we initially envisioned this course to be really complex, and then the more we got in and the more we started testing things, the more it started to get simple. And then as it got more simple, people reacted more positively to it. It had a greater impact. And then it got even more simple and more simple. And now to the point where you say, my God, what this course is, it's the initial light bulb to turn on. It's not an explanation of everything that falls under the umbrella of what we do at our center, but rather it's to turn on that initial light bulb. I thought, had we not been open to thinking about innovation or linking innovation to simplicity, we would have really missed what was so important. And it turns out it's going to be just immensely innovative because we realize we can't try to change the world on this. We actually have to go back to something very small. And so, it's that kind of flexibility, right? Not trying to be completely outside the box, but rather actually get inside the box.
I like that perspective, Sam, because I think we have a tendency, and I'll put my hand up here, to make every flex.
Yeah, same here.
We just layer it on until you sort of forget what the heck you even started out searching for.
Yeah, that's the story of my life. But it's amazing how simple this is and how it turned out to be something very, very tiny and simple, but powerful.
Well, we're going to really look forward to the outcome of that project. We want to walk through a couple of
so those are the things we thought about. As I said, we're kind of walking you down the path that we walked when we started. You know, what are our opportunities? What are the challenges we're going to face? And then we got to what we actually decided to do. So with the knowledge that we've generated through that brainstorming meeting, quite honestly, through the first 8 months, a year of our existence, of doing some needs assessment, getting the lay of the land, what are we going to do to address these things? And what we came up with for at least thinking through what we're going to do is this graphic, and quite honestly, I'd pull this apart and redo it just based on the things that we've changed over the last year. But really, the triangle at the top there, the research community and engagement, is critical to us. Because again, given limited resources, we are not going to change the face of online learning in the 3 years of our existence. We can plant seeds, we can help them grow to the extent that we can and hope for the best, but we're limited in what we'd be able to do. So we wanted to focus most heavily on where we could have the greatest impact. And that was, one, with our research. Actually, I'll just move to the slide now. The research side came into being with our research initiation grants. These are up to $50,000 grants that we award twice a year. We actually award about 5 or 6 of them in 2 cycles, about 12 a year, to help to support innovative ideas here at Penn State. To take that idea from that chair, that student's chair, or from that faculty's chair, or that staff member's chair, and give them the opportunity to build, whether that be to develop something. One example, we have a member in the College of Engineering, Conrad Tucker, built a haptic feedback glove to use to interact with a virtual world, in which this haptic feedback glove can give you a more immersive sense within this virtual world of interacting with things and to be able to manipulate objects. We have projects such as this, where it was really to build a digital badging platform for Penn State. It is a digital badging platform that is here now at Penn State and can be used. This is into, or is turning into, and continues to develop as a tool that can be used, and quite honestly, and beyond. So different folks, different things that can come out of it, but it is a peer-reviewed research initiation grant process where we try to provide monetary funding for these projects. And then we also have a graduate assistant to help out with these projects once the funding ends, to do some really basic grant searching and the like. There's supposed to be seed funds where the PIs can then go out and get that NSF funding, to go get that Department of Education funding or that IES funding, and to build it into some bigger potential and to have that greater impact. What we can do is that beginning part. And if, to go back to the challenges, if there's a big challenge related in this area that I see and that COIL has not been able to address, has been the handoff of what we do to that higher level of what organization exists at Penn State for that intermediate period, where we've done this beginning, we've seeded something, but hasn't gone to the multi-dollar grant level yet, or it hasn't found a large external funding source, and it's kind of a murky area here. So, and in most colleges and institutes of education, and this is part of building the network for innovation and things to think about. It's one of the things that COIL is trying to address in various ways. We didn't even have that graduate student to provide grant searching and grant writing help until about a year ago. So that's something new we're bringing to the address that gap. Engagement, which is focused on this culture of innovation. Because it's one thing to fund some ideas that have already been created, but it's another thing to inspire people and to provide them supports in dialogue and colleagues to be innovative, to think in an innovative way, and to have the courage to pursue those ideas. So some of the ways that we've addressed that is workshops, which is kind of a traditional type of workshop environment. But we bring like-minded individuals together for a day to work on or work with a new tool, to work in a new area, perhaps taking their syllabus to the table, and a number of faculty members thinking about how can I think through this in a competency-based way? How can I break down my course into competencies that I can badge or that perhaps can break down? And how may I link other faculty members? So bringing like-minded individuals to a table to think through these things. Symposia, which are zoomed out a little bit, and that would just be where we bring individuals related or interested in doing research on MOOC, using MOOC data. We have a MOOC research cluster that we sponsor. It brings together these like-minded individuals into a room a couple times a year in order to just think, just share resources, think together, and see about moving forward. And the same thing for competency-based education. We've got one coming up, which you can see on our website, where we're going to be sitting down and thinking together in this field. And then lastly, a thing that we do call COIL Perspectives, which are short interviews hosted on our YouTube channel with thought leaders across the spectrum on various issues related to innovation in higher education or online learning. And so they're ways of tapping into the brains of individuals that you may not necessarily be able to interact with on a regular basis. And this is including people like George Siemens, Anand Agarwal. Anand Agarwal is of edX. George Siemens, we all know from the MOOC initiatives and from many of his unique and influential thoughts on online. So these are just some of the things that we do to help engage our community, throw some topics out there and get people conversing. Then community, which this is one of the examples of what we're trying
Before
to do.
you leave, can I just make a real quick invitation? You know, I'm thinking about COIL Perspectives. And we said it's thought leaders. We should also consider you all as thought leaders.
Oh, absolutely.
So just an invitation. If you have ideas or you have perspectives or something, well, that's why we call it COIL Perspectives, that you'd want to share, please let us know. You might go to our site and take a look at those and see kind of the form and format. But I'd really like to make sure that you know you're welcome as well. If you've got thoughts and you want to sit down with us, we'll come to your place, set up a little studio, and do COIL Perspectives with you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it is, as I've said, with ignoring staff and students very often, some of the traditional approaches to stimulating innovation, we see the expertise sitting in every chair. There's an expertise somewhere. As Larry was mentioning, our intern who's leaving, he has an expertise in game. He has put in his 10,000 hours focusing on this field, and he knows his stuff. So there's an expertise there, and the COIL Perspective is trying to tap into that expertise. Some set questions that we define every year, just to get your ideas. So yeah, if you're ever interested, email Larry, email me. We'd be glad to set something like that up. COIL Conversations, one of the ways that we're trying to bring community together, to get like-minded individuals in a room together, talking on topics. And another one is an institute that Larry leads that just ended last week, the Institute for Emerging Leadership and Online Learning. Well, the face-to-face portion of the course just ended last week. And this is an opportunity to bring in individuals from around the world that are emerging leaders in online learning at their institutions, to bring them into a room together and help with some leadership development. Here at Penn State, led by Penn State faculty and OLC, formerly Sloan Stephens Partnership.
And we have several of them online today with
Excellent.
us, so always good to hear from you.
How many alumni?
We're at 300.
So as you can see, building a community, and honestly a very engaged community, coming to our events when they hear about them, providing us feedback, providing us insights, doing these perspectives. It's a way that we're trying to build a community, not just here at Penn State, but beyond. And then finally, impact, and this is where I would have changed our little graphic here. Impact is really not its own unique, distinct thing like research engagement community is within what we do. Impact is what we do internally to try to see if those other three things are working. And it is one of the things we've struggled with most, because as with any seed, it takes to grow. We're 3 years old. What has come out of a project that we funded in our first 6 months of living? As Chris mentioned, his project, which was one of those, is starting to see some of these big payoffs. It's 2 years later. And it's sometimes it's hard to see the impact there, and it's one of the things we've been trying to get a better grasp on. But to do that program evaluation, see what's happening, and then have a feedback loop to refine what we do. And it's one of the things that we've really tried to focus on for making COIL more responsive and better. And I think it's critical to for us to be effective and to have built what reputation we have built. So
We've got some great input coming on the line here, different ideas. So I'd like to, shall we say, leverage your expertise both in the room and online. Do you have ideas of that we can be doing to stimulate the innovation? We say in online, and that has certainly formed kind of the back of what we do, but also thinking about learning in all delivery formats. And framing it around online innovations. Are there other things, other programs? One of the things Brad didn't say is this year, as we go into our third year, we're kind of revisiting our structure. We're revisiting our mission. We're just thinking, okay, are we making an impact? We're young, and I appreciated someone's comment, Steph, a little earlier, who said it took 12 years for the space shuttle to which is amazingly fast, in my opinion. And yeah, I think she was kind of saying, give yourself time. But, you know, in internet years, we're what, 30 years old or something like that. So I'd love to hear from you as well out there of, you know, what are you doing in your institutions to stimulate innovation? Do you have other ideas of things that we can be refining and rethinking the programs we do? We'd love to hear from you. What would you expect next out of an organization like COIL? Angela asked a question, are you watching their institutions? Yes, we are, and probably not quite as intentionally as we could be. That sounds like a great project for you know, a graduate student to have their eye on nothing. But we track, and through programs like IELOL, we've developed a good network of community folks who want to input ideas in them. But that's something I think we could probably be doing a better job of. It's a really good point. Yes.
On institutions, because the reason all of us were talking about MOOCs is because a bunch of people threw money at a bunch of young startups in the middle of nowhere, known as California, Silicon Valley. So attention to more the pulse of where society's going, or where, you know, all of us collectively in EDU heads are going.
Brian, that's a good question, and I'd probably say, again, not as intentionally as we could be. And you know, having 4 of us sitting in an office someplace and I know you mean the larger COIL community. Maybe the discussion that we ought to be having is what do we see emerging that's not being addressed, where it's an opportunity. And as Jerry said earlier on, where are the needs exist that aren't being addressed. And so nobody would have anticipated MOOCs coming out of it came out of an educational environment from Stanford and from others, but you know, the mainstream education, their eye on that ball at all. Are there other opportunities like that are latent that can really be exploited?
it's one of the things that we have been thinking through as we're talking about restructuring, refocusing, rethinking what we do and how we do it, is diversifying the voice and opportunities for voices to come in. You know, we kicked everything off with this brainstorming meeting with a diverse, large group of people, and then we brought it to, you know, the 4 of us full-time as well as 3 co-directors, and we brought those voices. Now, we always had opportunities like this where we dialogue, we talk, we reach out, we have meetings, but no formal avenue for these voices to come in. And it's one of the things that we're likely going to be changing in the near future. So I agree with Larry that it is a place where somebody specifically devoted to assessing what's being done and what's not being done, it would be great. But at least we're now thinking about bringing more voices to the table.
Some thoughts from here in the room. You probably have had some, and I don't mean to exclude our folks online, but you've had some degree of interactions with Thoughts about what we can be doing better, directions, input, Chris?
One thing that, based on my experience with the rig, is to really be thinking about life after grant funding.
Yes.
So it either means like how can it continue to go, or how can we say, okay, it didn't work out. This is what we learned. Let's share that and then move on to the next thing. And it really was just luck, in some ways, that Megan and others at TLT picked up the badging platform and kept moving with it. Because being in a staff position, I wasn't somebody who could just, look for a lot of grant funding opportunities, not like faculty can. And so probably being more intentional and thinking about like, well, what's that going to mean in 1 year or 8 ends? Where's it going to go from there? It was really lucky, in that one instance, but there are probably other folks who would benefit from thinking about that before they're done with their funding.
And I agree. I think that handoff issue that I alluded to a little bit earlier, that handoff issue is tough because again, given the limited things that we can do, recognizing where we have to draw a line, there have days or places or people or departments or units that can act as that intermediary, as some place where we can help move it on, and not from serendipity, but intentional. Where that's what we do. That's how we move the process along. I agree wholeheartedly.
And I think that's part of that. So once you have a grant, a rig grant in particular, there's a cycle of that grant, and then we kind of, we don't physically drop you, of course. But, you're sort of like, okay, we've moved on to the next batch. And I think your question is, how do we embrace that community and continue to grow and serve that community as a group of practitioners? Great point. Other thoughts in-house or online? I'm seeing good dialogue.
Doing.
Sure.
And you're so young, you're hitting 3 years.
Thank
I
you,
think it'd be good to, yes, you're so young, Larry. If you could kind of cycle back with the people that have fallen off the table, if you will, and then kind of put them in your interview. So here's like, hey, here's our first wave of people that we funded, and kind of see where, what stemmed from there. And it's not just large grant funding. So like we were sidecar on a rig with Glenn Johnson. That in and kind of went its course. He made some case studies, cool. But the benefit to my group, which was not really related, is that he gave us some ideas about what we could do with our studio platform.
Oh, I see.
Which is completely tangentially related and added a lot of capability to that. So it's, I think, looking for, you said innovation is hard to define, but not treating innovation as just what the NSF will throw money at.
Yeah. Or that one thing. Brian, you raise a really good point. Is so one idea that Glenn did stimulated another, and we have almost no way of capturing that knowledge or that experience.
Having read Ben's reports, I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's where I was talking about that impact and measuring impact and trying to figure out. We struggle with it. We will continue to struggle with it. I don't know if we'll ever figure it out. But it's a matter of doing the best that we can.
Jerry, great idea. Jerry says, how about using those of us who are interested as volunteer staffers to monitor industry rundown leads and so forth? Great idea, Jerry. Thank you for volunteering. Hey, no, I love that idea. I love that idea. Hey, folks, we're about out of time, and I want to thank you for. He's got his first assignment. Terrific. I really want to thank you all for. Who can you contact if you want to volunteer? Why don't you start with Brad? He's much better at managing the details of things, and to keep a list of that. That is an awesome idea. Thank you all. Patty just posted Brad's email. Thank you all for your input today and your engagement. I really appreciate it. And turnout is terrific. And maybe this means we need to be revisiting this on a more regular basis, this topic to draw from the community. But thanks.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate everyone coming in virtually and everyone here in the room. Have a great day.